So I just wanted to make another video because in the last video I had kind of started to go off on a tangent about some of my personal thoughts on the way flight training takes place today with regards to being able to get into aviation in the first place. We're constantly seeing articles and videos and hearing things about how aviation needs more pilots. General aviation is dying. We need younger pilots. We need women who are pilots. We need. There's so many things that we're always being bombarded with. But the fact remains that at the end of the day, to get into aviation is extremely expensive, and not everyone wants to get into aviation with a goal of going to the airlines, for instance. Even that in and of itself is extremely expensive. Now, granted, at the end of the process, you have the prospect of taking that skill and utilizing it to make money, to recoup some of the costs that you put into that flight training. But like I said, not everyone has that goal in mind. Some people do want to get through to be a commercial pilot, but maybe they want to be a bush pilot, or maybe they want to be a CFI full time. There are many people who enjoy teaching and who are good at teaching. One of the best CFIs I ever met was someone who wanted to be a CFI. That was his goal. It wasn't a matter of this is just something to build hours until I can move on to the airlines. There are people who want to do that, but again, those opportunities for money making in that field is generally not as high or as long term or as stable as somebody looking to go to the airlines as a career. And there's many other avenues of professional pilot options as well that vary greatly. But then again too, you get individuals who really have no desire to become a professional pilot, and that would be what we'd refer to as just the general aviation community. You have your sport pilots, you have your private pilots, then maybe you are instrument rated. Maybe there's so many levels that you can go up with your ratings, but not necessarily with the goal of becoming a commercial pilot, to be compensated for your work. But think about it from the point of view of somebody wanting to get into aviation as a hobby. Now, it's one thing to justify spending a large amount of money on an education with the opportunity for reimbursement. It's something entirely different to justify spending a large amount of money on what essentially is just a hobby. Now, I completely understand aviation for me is not just a hobby, it's really is a passion. But even things that you're passionate about that don't make you money, that you spend money on, you have to find a justification there. And each individual is different. Each person's circumstances are different. But at the end of the day, it is not cheap to get into aviation in any capacity. So that brings me to what I was getting into with my last video before I cut that off, which is I feel like there are opportunities to discuss ways to make some changes when it comes to getting people into aviation with their primary training and making it more affordable for people. The sport pilot option was something that was interesting because it was supposed to be able to make things cheaper, but that didn't happen. Or it could have happened, but it's rare that happens. But when you start looking into the costs involved with flying, now obviously there are many expenses that are just completely unavoidable. The cost of fuel is going to be high. It's always going to be high. Maintenance is going to be something that always has to be done. And when it comes to the cost of parts, that is something that it really is non-negotiable. But when you start getting into all of the other costs of operating an airplane, that's where you start getting a lot of opportunities for wiggle room there. When you start to compare the costs of airplane ownership and you see that, okay, well now suddenly I'm seeing this exact same airplane that I've been using at my flight school, but if I owned it outright, my costs would be half. But I can't justify spending that amount of money because I'm only able to fly 50 or 60 hours a month. Okay, then you have the opportunity. Maybe you could join a maybe you could join a flying club. But there are also situations like that where even in the area that I live in, where this isn't an aviation hotbed, and we've got flight schools all the time, and we've got aviation industry here, and there are pilots everywhere, and yet there are barely any flying clubs. And when there are some flying clubs, it's next to impossible to find a spot in one. Then again, too, you get many flying clubs that don't allow primary training in their aircraft. So that brings me back again to that initial cost. Let's say you're flying a Cessna 150, 152, and for your time in the airplane and your time with your CFI, you're paying $150 an hour on the cheap end. Well, that adds up significantly. But then when you start looking at what those basic costs for the airplane could be, suddenly there's a lot of opportunities to make it more affordable. And what I'm getting at is we already have a lot of philanthropic opportunities where there are scholarships for people. There are many places that offer scholarships for primary flight training. But really, at the end of the day, it's a very limited amount compared to how many people would like to get into aviation. The primary reason why people stop their flight training or don't even pursue their flight training is the cost. And I've had some people who have said, well, if you can't afford to do your primary flight training, then you don't even need to get into aviation at all. It's always going to be expensive. And a little part of me understands and agrees with that because, yeah, it is always going to be expensive. There's no way around that. But if you can get past that initial hurdle, maybe you can get through, okay, I've gotten my private pilot's license now. Then you can maintain that. You can maintain your currency, you can maintain your proficiency, and then you can grow and you can build on things, and then who knows how your circumstances may change later. And when you already have that foundation, you can continue to build on it and enjoy it as you have it, as opposed to if you just don't ever pursue it or stop pursuing it because of the cost involved. So where I think things are not all that far-fetched to think about or to discuss, at least as a jumping off point, is more opportunities to kickstart people getting into aviation and being able to overcome that initial hurdle of your primary flight training and your expense. Some people who get into aviation are able to afford it, and that's great. But there are so many people out there who just absolutely love aviation and are basically barred from it because they can't get past even just a small hurdle. Sometimes when it's just this far out of reach, it might as well be $1 million out of reach. But so, why not more scholarships? Why not more opportunities from organizations like AOPA and EAA where they can sponsor this education and not just an initial flight training, but continuing to help individuals as they go through their flight training. Or I have talked to so many people who just love what they do. Pilots who just love to fly. Mechanics who love working on airplanes. CFIs who love to teach. Many of these individuals are young and they do it as their profession, and many of them are older, maybe retired, and they do it as something as just a side job. But is it that far-fetched to think that you could have organizations, maybe there's a flight school where the CFIs fly and teach because they love to fly and teach, and they want to see people come into the general aviation community and to continue this industry and continue this environment going forward. What if they offer their services for half the price? What if you have maintenance coordinators at the flight school and A&Ps who are able to work on the airplanes for a diminished cost? What if then suddenly you have a large group of people on this flying club type model but applied to a flight school where students can come in and they can take advantage of this flight training for similar costs to if the airplane was owned? Maybe they're just paying gas and a small maintenance fee. these are just ideas that I'm spitballing, but these are the kind of things where you think, okay, if this can work on small scales, why couldn't it work on larger scales? And then you apply that to the modern opportunities for promotion we have with social media and with the internet and with YouTube. It's just so many opportunities. That's something that I see is obviously a complete failure with, at least in my area. There are flight schools all over the place and you can't find them. When I was looking to do my primary flight training, I was hunting down flight schools and CFIs, and I was doing all of the legwork, and I knew what I was looking for, and it was still like pulling teeth to find somebody who'd be willing to fly with me. None of the flight schools advertise. None of the flight schools have decent websites. Most of the flight schools, you can barely even find their phone number on the internet. These things need to be brought into the modern day. We need to give people access. We need to give people opportunities. We need to give people motivation. And then we need to continue to help people to fly beyond just an initial flight training. I mean, you pick up even Sport Aviation magazine. Here's the selfish plug. They did an article about my lawnmower. First page. You open the first page. What does it say? We need pilots. This is the kind of thing that we see all the time. We see such a need. I'd be interested in hearing your ideas. If you like what I'm talking about, if you hate what I'm talking about, obviously this is not something that I don't have any kind of a business model, a business plan written out, but this is something that I've thought about for a really long time. I've known enough people involved in aviation who have been interested in this kind of thing, people who are willing to volunteer their time for free or for a diminished cost so that they can help people to get involved in something that they love, so that they can show people this avenue to get into something that they are passionate about. If you have thoughts on this, put them in the comments below. If you like it, if you hate it, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. If you have ideas, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. This is something that's really interesting to me, and that it really hits close to home because I've had struggles with this as well. I enjoy talking about stuff like this. I just wanted to put some ideas out there while they were fresh in my head. If you enjoy this, check out some of our other videos as well. We've got previous discussions about these kind of things and aviation things in general. We've got a back catalog of flying videos as well. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so it'll notify you whenever new videos come up. And we'll see you next time. And yes, as just a recognition of things, I am filming in just a makeshift area. It's the middle of the night and I don't want to wake people up, so I went out into the garage, and the garage is a mess. But we do what we can, right?